Everyone to our second virtual event in our 2026 Alumni Showcase Series with Dr. Connor Eichenauer. I'm Mike Leckrone, Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement, and also with us is Megan Sarver, Director of Alumni Relations. 2019 grad Connor Eichenauer graduated from Manchester with a BA in Psychology, Industrial Organizational Concentration. Connor was active in the MU community as a four-year student athlete, two-time men's tennis captain, and a member and leader of numerous student organizations. In 2019, he received the Outstanding Senior Leadership Award, MU Athletics Director Award, and MU Athletics Warren Garner Award for Scholarship, Athletic Achievement, Leadership, and Service. Connor credits the MU Psychology Department's rigorous training and Manchester's well-rounded liberal arts education with positioning him well for his postgraduate journey. He went on to earn his MA and Ph.D. in Industrial Organizational Psychology from Michigan State University's top-ranked program, where he specialized in workplace psychological assessment and leadership. Connor is currently Talent Assessment Manager at GE Aerospace, focusing on selecting and developing executives and future leaders. In this role, he builds and deploys psychological and talent assessment tools that empower leaders with data-based insights about themselves and others to accelerate their development and enable effective and fair talent decisions. Connor, who became a member of our alumni board on January 1st, lives in Fort Wayne, Indiana with his wife, Riley, who is also a Manchester grad. Connor, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate that introduction. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining tonight. It's really great to see everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces, which is really fun. And before I get started, just wanted to also reiterate what Mike mentioned, that feel free to, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to pop them in the chat, raise your hand virtually or physically. We'll try to note that and get to any questions or comments. Want this to be a really informal, free-flowing conversation, so I don't necessarily have, a bunch of stuff to present to you or anything like that, but just want to chat a little bit about my Manchester experience and what I'm up to now, and would love to interact with you all a little bit. So feel free to ask any questions or share any thoughts as they come up.
Eva, raise my hand.
So I thought I'd spend a few minutes first describing a little bit about my Manchester experience, which I think should first start with how I ended up at Manchester. And I think the first thing I have to mention with how I ended up at Manchester is some of my family ties. So both of my parents went to Manchester. My dad, Joel, studied education. My mom, Lori Zimmerman, studied pre-medicine. All four of my grandparents actually went to Manchester. And the other day I was counting it up. I think I lost count, but I had some numerous amount of aunts and uncles went to Manchester. And actually a great-grandparent went to Manchester and a great-great-grandparent went to Manchester. So I'm actually a fifth generation Manchester graduate, which is pretty cool. So that's kind of, I would say, a foundational element of my Manchester journey is my family ties. But that wasn't necessarily top of mind for me as I was searching for colleges. I knew I wanted a small school experience where I could participate in different clubs and activities and student organizations. I wanted to be able to play tennis, and I was not a Division I tennis athlete. So I wanted somewhere smaller where I could play tennis and be part of that team environment. In terms of academics, I knew I wanted somewhere that had a low student to faculty ratio, would have an environment where I could get a liberal arts education. And in terms of exactly what I wanted to study in my career interests at that point, they were still evolving. I had a vague interest in psychology at that point, but also kind of businesses and workplace settings, and starting to think about how psychology would apply in workplace settings, since people spend a lot of time at work, and having a good workplace experience is important. And so Manchester was a natural fit for a couple of reasons. And so thinking about that psychology aspect, really, I have to mention here briefly, my grandfather, Gary Zimmerman, was a longtime professor of psychology at Manchester. He focused on counseling psychology and also taught a lot of mediation and conflict resolution. He started Education for Conflict Resolution, or ECR, on Manchester's campus, which still operates from campus today. It's been a really great resource for the local community and the campus. He also did a lot with celebrating diversity workshops and started those on campus several decades ago. And I think those might be still continuing today. So it was really a lot of conversations with my grandfather about how the world works and how the human mind works that kind of initially got me interested in the field of psychology. Um, and so that kind of laid a foundation for, kind of Manchester gave me all of those elements, and it seemed like a place where I could, participate in tennis and activities like I mentioned. So I showed up to Manchester then in fall of 2015 to play tennis and study psychology, and then just see what else would happen. And I want to talk a little bit about my Manchester experience in a couple of themes here. The first is going to be thinking about the training I received in psychology and how that prepared me for graduate school and beyond. I had a lot of great experiences in the psychology department. One that I'll just share briefly here is a fun story. In my intro to psychology class, my very first semester at Manchester, it was taught by Dave Johnson, who was at Manchester for a while, and I don't think he's there any longer. But I talked to Dave quite a bit, and he could realize that I was quite interested in psychology and in research and wanting to get involved. And so he suggested that I conduct a little experiment on the side, just as a fun little side class project. And it turned out that my classmates in that intro to psych class were kind of the participants in that study, and they were a little bit blind to what was going on in the study, actually. So what happened was I ended up having each of my classmates come into this little side laboratory room one by one, and basically they just sat on the other side of a table from me. I had a questionnaire with a few questions asking them about their daily stress and things like that. And for half of the group, before I asked them the questions about their daily stress, I actually had them stick their arm in a bucket of ice water for 2 minutes first to kind of induce a state of stress with them. The other interesting thing about this room was I also had a little jar of M&Ms sitting on the table. And so basically what this experiment tried to do, and it successfully replicated, is that by inducing a stressful environment for people, I could get them to eat more M&Ms. So I would weigh the M&Ms dish before and after they left the room to see how many M&Ms they ate. And I just thought that was so fascinating that they actually said in the questionnaire that they weren't more stressed from the cold water, but their brain knew that they were more stressed, and they actually ate more M&Ms because of it to cope with that stress. So I thought that was just fascinating, and that kind of set the trajectory for my interest in psychology research and getting a little bit more into psychology. I ended up doing some additional research in undergrad relating to student evaluations of teaching and looking at the psychometric properties of those and how those kind of end of course evaluations of faculty might be useful, but also maybe could be improved. And I ended up giving some recommendations to the administration on how to improve those. And that research was done with Marcy Coulter-Kern. Marcy and Rusty were so great in the psychology department, setting a foundation for my learning. Kelsey Jo Kessie in the psychology department was great to have as a kind of early career faculty member who actually had a background in IO psychology. And so that's what kind of got me going in that direction too. And she helped me do some interesting research into looking at students that use their smartphones more often. They actually were less able to recover after class, and they thought that using their phones would help them, detach and become less stressed after school, but it actually had the opposite effect. So that was kind of interesting. I ended up presenting a lot of this research at regional conferences in Chicago, got a summer research grant. So all of this research experience was really helpful in setting the foundation for being able to go to graduate school and get a PhD. One other that I would also mention about the psychology department, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Jack Wiley. So Jack, for those of you who don't know, arrived at Manchester the year before I got to Manchester. He had been a longtime organizational consultant, a prominent IO psychologist in the field of industrial and organizational psychology. And he ended up selling his business and semi-retiring, I would call it, in Wabash County, and ended up teaching at Manchester for about 5 years, which perfectly overlapped with my time there. And I ended up taking, I think, 6 classes with Jack over my 4 years. He ended up pulling me into his research on employee engagement. I helped him with some research on thinking about what employees most want from their organizations and most want from their leaders at work. He also pulled me into some of his consulting work. I helped him analyze employee survey data and write up client reports, and that kind of got me interested in those topics. And he also supported some of my research ideas that I had. So that kind of led to me eventually doing an honors thesis at Manchester and getting that summer research grant that I mentioned. And so having someone like helpful, and I'm just forever indebted to his mentorship and the time he invested in me. And I think he's just really personifies Manchester faculty and how much they care about their students and kind of that individualized attention that they give their students. So I'm just forever grateful for what Jack provided to me. I would also mention a couple of other notable academic experiences at Manchester. So I mentioned I wanted to go somewhere with a well-rounded liberal arts education, and I definitely found that to be the case at Manchester. A couple of notable classes, taking Foundations of Business with Tim Ogden, Organizational Behavior with Wendy Hoffman, and I think I actually saw Wendy on here. Wendy was a great faculty member and also my tennis coach for a couple of years. So she got double dose of Connor, which I don't know if that was a good or a bad thing.
That was a good thing, Connor.
Okay. She says that here in front of everyone, but thanks so much. A couple of other notable courses, sociology with Katie Gray Brown was a notable course for me. Thinking about some similar problems to psychology, but from just a different angle and different lens was helpful. I took several foreign language classes, some Spanish and German, and even though I didn't do a long-term travel abroad experience, just thinking about things from different cultures and different perspectives was helpful. And I did a couple of experiential education courses, some travel abroad courses. So I did a cultural psychology class in Hawaii with Marcy and Rusty, which is, I believe, every 2 years they might take that trip to Hawaii to learn about kind of different cultures in Hawaii. That was a fantastic class. I ended up taking a religion class that traveled throughout Eastern Europe a couple of years later. And so it's just really interesting to think about all of those different historic religions throughout Eastern Europe and even experiencing a Muslim culture in Sarajevo, Bosnia was fascinating. And I also mentioned that one thing that I think really shaped my Manchester experience was just being able to participate in a lot of different types of clubs and activities, student jobs. The variety was just fantastic. And I just loved being able to participate in all those things. So a couple of brief ones to mention, some psychology clubs like Psychology Society and Psych-Chi. The honors program was great just to be able to interact with a lot of different students in different types of degree programs that were all similarly, really motivated and cared about academics and had a thirst for learning. I ended up being a peer tutor, which I think was great to kind of formalize my knowledge by being able to teach others about psychology. And it required me to learn things at an even deeper level. I was a Spartan ambassador and I did some campus tours through the Spartan Ambassador program. I was part of the Students Today Alumni Tomorrow, the student alumni organization with Megan and Mike. So that was a lot of fun. One more notable one was I was an orientation leader. So I would, for a couple of different years, I was part of a program that would help think about how do we best integrate first-year students on campus and make sure that they're having a great first-year experience. And it was actually at a time when the leadership of that program was changing. And so it gave us an opportunity to rethink how do we integrate first-year students on campus. It's great to give them a really fun experience that first week when they arrive on campus. What are some of those evidence-based things from the research that it shows are important in how we integrate students on campus? And so that was fun to put those things into practice. The other thing I would mention too is tennis, of course, as I mentioned at the top. I love playing tennis. I have my MU tennis quarter zip on right now, actually. Of course, Wendy Hoffman here was a big part of that experience. But I ended up playing tennis all 4 years, was a captain a couple of years, and I just had the greatest time playing tennis. It was an endless amount of fun. All the road trips with all of the guys led to lifelong friendships. Taught me a lot about teamwork, especially as a younger team member. My first couple of years, it taught me a lot about leadership, my junior and senior year, with a lot of more junior members on the team. I think it gave me a lot of skill building opportunities in terms of mental toughness and resilience. And kind of, they say when you're out on the tennis court, you're the only one out there, and there's no one that can save you sometimes when you're playing singles, especially. So a lot of life lessons there, and just thinking about practice and repetition and how important that is. A lot of transferable skills from tennis that I think are useful for everyone that student athletes get in a lot of different types of sports. And so I think that's a great thing that Manchester offers, is that student athlete experience that helps people gain those life skills, but also, as I mentioned, kind of those lifelong friendships with all of those teammates. So that's something I'll forever take away from my Manchester experience. So that's just a little bit about my Manchester experience, and happy to talk about anything else if anyone's interested. But then thinking about towards the end of my Manchester experience, it was time to apply to graduate school. And so the fall of my senior year, I ended up applying to different graduate programs in industrial and organizational psychology. That was a lot of writing personal statements and getting feedback from trusted peers and mentors and things like that. My grandfather, Gary, read my personal statement, having advised many different psychology students and helping them get into graduate school. And one challenge at that moment in my life was that my grandfather actually passed away in November of my senior year. So he had read my personal statement, and he knew that I was going to be applying to Ph.D. programs in IO psychology. And he knew where I had applied and had helped craft my personal statement and give me feedback on that. But he didn't actually get to be around when I was accepted into graduate school. But I'll forever treasure him being able to read that personal statement and help me craft that. And another gift that I had that last semester was, as a senior in the fall semester, I ended up taking a mediation and conflict resolution class, which was a class that he had started at Manchester several decades before. It was taught by someone else, of course, but they actually had him come in and do a guest lecture in October. And so I got to experience a guest lecture from my grandfather in the course that he started about a month before he passed away. So that was just such a great gift, and I enjoyed that so much, and I'll forever take that with me. But yeah, it was a challenging time for me, but also, a joyous time being able to graduate from Manchester and think about what's coming next for me. So I ended up being accepted into Michigan State's organizational psychology program, and was really excited for what was to come next. And so I would definitely like to talk a little bit about my graduate school experience and how that led into my career and what I'm doing now. But just wanted to pause there and see if folks had any questions.
I don't have a question,
Connor.
Connor, but I just wanted to, it's a shame that you weren't more involved as a student. So, I mean, I think that would have maybe helped a little bit, but.
If I thought a little bit harder, I might be able to come up with one or two more things I was involved in, but.
That was going to be my question, Connor. This is Isaac Miller. I was going to ask if there's anything that you wish you had done that you didn't get a chance to.
I mean, there were always so many trade-offs. So thanks for the question, Isaac. That was my doubles partner in college there. Maybe I wish that our tennis team won a few more times than we did. It would have been great to win the conference tournament. But in terms of other activities, I think I had a great variety, and I just really enjoyed being able to participate in lots of different types of things. Maybe didn't play as many intramural sports as I wanted, but also got a lot of other fun activities in. So yeah, great question. Unless that was a leading question, Isaac, that he had one coming. Maybe he wanted some more tennis in with me or something like that.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure you knew who your best doubles partner was.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, Isaac.
Okay.
So I'll just talk for a few minutes here quickly about my grad school years. So over the course of 4.5 years I spent at Michigan State, I took classes on topics within industrial and organizational psychology, such as leadership, motivation, learning and development, employee selection and assessment, occupational health and well-being, things like that. Those are kind of the topics that we think about as applying psychology to workplace settings. I ended up having a lot of different great research experiences. Maybe I'll just share a couple that folks might find a little bit interesting. So one of the first ones when I arrived at grad school, COVID actually hit that spring of my first year. And so amidst kind of the uncertainty and, thinking about moving on to Zoom classes and things like that, my advisor and I were talking one day and thinking about, this is kind of a unique opportunity in the world right now to study some things about the world of work, which had changed so much. And so we ended up doing 2 studies comparing kind of how people perceived effective leadership during COVID-19 and thinking about how effective leadership styles might be similar or different to kind of pre-COVID research. And so that was kind of an interesting opportunity. Ended up doing a couple of other studies. Maybe I'll note a couple here. One was thinking about accent-based discrimination in hiring contexts. So even when controlling for variables such as fluency, looking at how people view immigrants with accents as less hireable and less competent than those without accents. And so that was kind of a theme of some research that I did, thinking about how to make a more equitable and fair workplace environment for everyone. Ended up doing some research onto thinking about how people view hiring process experiences when they have disabilities and how we can help remove barriers into hiring processes for those with disabilities. Did some research into workforce reentry programs for those that have taken career breaks. So if you think about people that took career breaks for family leave or responsibilities or parental leave, or perhaps a military break or a continuing education break. And some organizations have now started offering programs to help them reintegrate into the workforce and provide some more structured mentorship and guidance and things like that. And so did some research into best practices related to those, which was kind of interesting. In total, I think that was one thing that I was just really proud of about my Michigan State experience, was just all of the great research experiences that I had and all of the great collaborations with different faculty members and students in my program. I ended up publishing 2 different papers in academic journals and nearly a dozen others presented at research conferences. So it was just a great experience and a great time to be in a similar environment with lots of people that think about things in different ways. And that was just something that I'll forever take away from my MSU experience. A couple of other things unrelated to research. So I had 2 applied opportunities that really kind of opened the door a little bit further and led me in the direction kind of away from research into working more in organizational settings. One, I worked at Honeywell for part of 4 years and spent some time part-time work there, applying what I learned in graduate school and helping design and deploy assessments to help predict which job candidates were most likely to succeed. Then I also spent a summer at Ford Motor Company doing some work with their employee engagement survey. So on an annual basis, they would do a survey of all of their employees across both of the kind of salaried, more professional type employees, but also the hourly employees that work in the factory settings. And helping design those surveys and collect high quality data and analyze that to help interpret what are the insights into how our workforce is feeling and what are some actions we can take to improve the workplace experience for everyone and improve outcomes for people and for the organization. So I really liked that experience at Ford and Honeywell. And so that kind of led me down the path of really wanting to focus on applying what I had learned and working on kind of not only psychology applied to workplace settings, but really applying evidence-based practices into organizational settings, as opposed to doing research and publishing that in journals as a faculty member. So that kind of led me down this career that I'm on right now. And I'd love to talk just a few minutes about what I'm up to now. So I actually ended up just graduating from MSU with my Ph.D. in IO psychology a couple of years ago, and I've been employed for the last 2 years full-time at GE Aerospace. So happy to talk about what I do now, but also just wanted to take a moment to pause there to see if there were any questions about my grad school experience.
Did you get to meet Tom Izzo while you were at Michigan State?
I did get to meet Tom Izzo. MSU basketball coach. It was kind of a random chance event. It was at my graduation from MSU, actually. He just walked past, and that was a crazy event that just happened. I still can't believe that happened. So that was kind of cool for any basketball fans out there.
Connor, did you feel, I guess, prepared enough from Manchester when you went into grad school? Did you feel more prepared maybe than your peers, or talk about that?
Yeah, and I actually had some reflections that I was going to share at the end too, and this leads perfectly into that. But I think thinking about graduate school, especially, a lot of my peers in graduate school came from big schools, actually, so large state universities, for example, and they had a little bit of research experience with maybe some, titans in the field, right? So big name psychology professors that are really well known across the field. And so they could kind of flaunt that on their resumes or whatever. But when you dug a little bit deeper, it turned out that they were kind of just doing some menial data collection perhaps for them, and maybe didn't even get to talk to them very much. And so I think, personally, my Manchester experience, gave me a lot more than that in terms of my interactions with faculty and being able to, go in and talk to any of the psychology faculty or Wendy Hoffman, for example, and discuss ideas I had about research or other topics to chat about, and they just didn't have those experiences. So that helped me, I think, develop my research, but also thinking about succeeding in the classroom environment. So in graduate school, for me at least, our classes were very small, only about 4 to 6 people typically in a class, and they were all discussion-based lectures, typically for 3 hours long. It was just discussing different topics. And I felt very well prepared for that and very comfortable in that environment. And a lot of my classmates did not, coming from classes where they had several hundred people in a class and were all of a sudden expected to talk for a lot of a class, right? And engage with students, engage with ideas, engage with the faculty member was kind of foreign to them. And even things like kind of being able to take the initiative early on and, as I'm formulating my early research ideas, just go in and, schedule a meeting with a faculty member or just knock on their door and say, hey, do you have a minute to chat about this idea? And some of my classmates would be like, what are you doing? Like, you can't just these people are like famous. You can't just go in there. And I'm like, what do you mean you can't? Like, they're faculty. This is what they're for. And I think both of us were kind of right? Like, they maybe were right that this was not necessarily an expectation of them. But for me, that was what my Manchester experience was. Like, all of the faculty were open and willing to engage with me and talk and just spend a lot of individualized attention supporting my ideas and my growth. And that was something that I kind of maybe drew out of the faculty members at MSU. Maybe they weren't necessarily used to doing that all of the time with all of the students, but possibly because not all of the students took advantage of that and were used to that from their undergraduate environment either. So I think that was something that really helped me for sure. Awesome. Well, thanks for those questions. I thought I'd spend just a few minutes sharing a little bit more about what I do right now. So I've been at GE Aerospace for almost 2 years now, and I do talent assessments work for them. My team is the executive talent management team within the global HR organization. So our team does a lot of different types of things. We focus on executive development, so helping leaders learn and grow. We help managers kind of evaluate performance and manage the performance of all people across the organization. So thinking about how to give employees feedback in a good way and measure their performance and performance correction. We help plan for future talent. So thinking about succession planning and things like that. And what I specifically focus on kind of has implications for all of those, but it's talent assessment. So thinking about how to design and deploy psychological assessments. So these assessments might measure things like personality or cognitive ability or job-related knowledge and skills and abilities, using different methods like sometimes it's interviews, sometimes it's behavioral inventory, sometimes it's tests or work samples or role plays and simulations, lots of different types of methods to measure these things. And really the goal of these is to help people learn more about themselves, to help them develop and learn and grow. So thinking about, what might be my gaps in my knowledge or gaps in my skills, and where should I focus my learning and development? And sometimes it's to help people learn more about others. So helping leaders think about, how do I select the right employees for my team? Who's going to be the best fit on my team? Or thinking about the key leadership positions in the organization. How do we build strong succession plans so that if that person is promoted or leaves, there's not a big gap for a while we try to fill that position. We have kind of a succession plan ready in place. Or how do we identify high potential employees? So those that maybe they don't have all of the capabilities right now, but they're going to go a long way and they're going to grow really quickly. How do we identify who those people are so we invest in the right people? So those are some of the key questions that I tackle at work right now. But overall, the goal is to just help the organization have the right people in the right place at the right time. So who are those people that we need to get in the right seats on the bus, as one famous author puts it. So not only does this help the organization do better and perform better, but it also, what I care about most personally, is it helps people flourish at work. So thinking about people's individual well-being and wanting to make sure that they're having a good workplace experience, and that they're in a role that fits them and their personality and the way that they work. So we're all going to have a much better time. We spend, over half of our working lives, our awake lives at work, right? And so wanting to be in roles where we can flourish and have a great time. And so that's kind of what I help do, is make sure that people are in positions where they can do that, where they can enjoy what they do, where they can contribute meaningfully, and just overall have a positive workplace experience. And so really what these tools do are a couple of things. I think one key thing is really trying to help replace gut-based decisions, is what I like to call them. So people making decisions based on their intuition. So I might make a judgment about Megan or about Mike based on a few minutes that I talked to them. And maybe that's right, but the research shows that a lot of times it's not. And the research also shows that a lot of the time it could be subject to different biases we have about people, either about their different personal characteristics, or it might just not be accurate because, maybe they're just having a bad day, or I'm just not a very good judge of how that person's working. So how can we instead give people tools to replace that subjectivity with more objective and data-driven insights about people, to make more accurate decisions and data-based decisions? So for example, thinking about evidence-based interviewing, so helping create tools so people can conduct workplace and employment interviews in a way that will lead to more accurate predictive decisions that are less subject to bias. That's something that my team works on quite a bit. The overall goal, again, is to then lead to more predictive decisions. So ensuring that, for example, the best candidates get the roles that they should get. So objectively, who is the best candidate here? We want to make sure that that best candidate gets the role because they deserve it. They're going to help the organization the most, and they're going to enjoy it the most if they're in that role, right? So how do we make sure that that's happening most often? And then also, how do we make sure that these decisions are fair? So not just that the best person's getting it, but when the best person gets it, it's also a fair decision, and that it's not subject to any sort of biases or anything like that. So those are kind of the two primary goals of what I do. And just sharing a few more details about that, some interesting challenges I'm working on right now is really thinking about when thinking about who should be hired, maybe, or things like that, thinking about the can do side of it and the will do. So the can do, thinking about what are people currently capable of? What are their current levels of knowledge or skills or abilities they have? And that's definitely a great place to start. We can make hiring decisions based on that, right? That's something that's going to be more predictive than, I'm just chit-chatting with someone for 5 minutes and I like them. Seems like they're a great person. I like them. I should hire them because I like them or because they're like me, right? That's not going to be a very predictive way to make a decision. So thinking about current capabilities and job-related skills and knowledge, that's a great place to start. But I would argue that that second piece, so the can do, but also the will do, matters even more. So not just what someone can do, but how are they actually going to act in a real workplace environment? So what is their level of motivation, or what is their work style, and to what extent does their work style fit within a team or within an organization? To what extent does their work style fit within an organization's culture? So, like tech environments and tech companies are much different than like GE Aerospace, where I work. That's more engineering culture and more of a manufacturing environment. So someone who comes from a tech company might not fit as well. And so really, that's one reason it's important to think about not just the can do, but the will do. Another interesting question that we're thinking about a lot right now is high potential and how to measure hidden potential. How do we find those diamonds in the rough? And that's one piece that can do can miss sometimes. Maybe that person doesn't have the skills that they need right now in their role. Or, when we compare candidate A to candidate B, maybe candidate B doesn't quite have the skills, but what if they're a diamond in the rough that maybe they just don't have that experience yet? Maybe they're earlier in their career or came from a background where they didn't have the same formal education as person A. But we know that, for example, from their character skills is what I like to call them. So their behavioral tendencies, their ability to learn, their motivation to learn. Maybe they're a really great team member and they have a great pro-social orientation. Maybe that person is actually the better person to hire because maybe in that first 3-6 months, they wouldn't perform at the same level as person A, but maybe over the course of 1, 2, 5, 10 years, maybe they're the right person to hire because of that potential they have. So thinking about not just that short-term trajectory, but the long-term trajectory. How do we make the best hiring decisions? So those are just some examples of some key questions that we're thinking about. And I would say the other piece too is thinking about not just what each person individually brings in terms of how well they can do a job, but also how well can they lead others? So a famous saying goes, right, that what got you here won't get you there. So sometimes the best individual contributors, however well you can perform your job, sometimes you're not going to be the best leader of a team or a leader of a unit or a whole organization. And so thinking about how do we measure different characteristics of people to see how are they going to be a good leader, and how do we measure different things to help them identify where they need to focus their development efforts on how to become a better leader. So that leadership piece is a really important one, and in addition to just how well I can do my job and kind of do that individual piece. And so that's just a little bit about what I do on a day-to-day basis and some of the questions I'm thinking about. So happy to chat about any more of that, but maybe just a few reflections here just to tie up a few things. And so, Megan teed it up beautifully with thinking about how MU prepared me for graduate school was a big theme that I had been thinking about coming into this. And so just giving me a lot of different research experience with different like statistics and research methods courses, discussion-based classes, as I noted. I think another one is really the ability to think from a big picture perspective and from different disciplines. So a lot of students that I went to graduate school with took all of the psychology classes and not much else. And so they could really think about things from a psychology perspective, but maybe thinking about things from a sociological perspective or a business perspective or other things didn't come as naturally to them. And so having that variety of different classes and academic backgrounds, I think was helpful for me. And I definitely credit Manchester with that. I think also really leaning into that liberal arts education theme, critical thinking is a big piece. I think Manchester really helped me learn how to think maybe more than other schools might. And maybe that was just credit to the psychology department or the different faculty that I worked with, I'm not sure. But critical thinking to solve complex problems, I think, is a strength of Manchester graduates in general. And I think that also that liberal arts education really helps prepare you for cross-functional collaboration. So in a lot of workplace settings, you're not just going to work with people who have your same academic background or the way that you think, and you're going to have to work with accountants or folks from finance or engineers or lots of different people that I would work with on a day-to-day basis. And having experienced a little bit from a couple of classes I took in a subject area like that might give me some insight into how these people think and can relate to them a little bit better. And so I think that's another way Manchester prepared me really well. Just a couple more things here. Really thinking about my Manchester experience and what was most meaningful for me, I would say the mentors that I had at Manchester were most meaningful. So really getting my start from my grandfather and the connection that he had to Manchester from being a longtime faculty member. Marcy and Rusty Coulter-Kern in the psychology department, really helping lay the foundation in my learning in psychology. KJ Kessie, as I mentioned, is an early career IO psychologist, helped me learn a lot. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, Jack Wiley is my first significant formative mentor in all of the time and effort he invested in me and lots of other students at Manchester. I'll just be forever grateful for all of the mentorship I received from all of those folks. And I think that's really what makes Manchester a special place. And another thing that I would say that makes Manchester special is just the relationship. So I mentioned tennis. I have a lot of lifelong friendships from tennis. Isaac Miller on the call here. I actually had, in my wedding, 4 of my groomsmen were friends from Manchester. And so that was kind of fun. I met my wife, Riley, who's now a faculty member in the Manchester University Fort Wayne School, the pharmacy school. She's a faculty member there. I met her at Manchester through some student athlete connections and the honors program and things like that. And so really have a lot of great lifelong relationships and friendships from Manchester. And I would just note that I'm, as Mike noted, starting on the alumni board here this year, looking forward to definitely building a lot more relationships with all of the alumni of different generations at Manchester. So just want to thank everyone very much for joining this and giving me the opportunity to come speak. And would definitely be happy to answer any questions or chat about any other topics that seem interesting to folks.
Connor, there's a couple questions in the chat. And the first one is from Beata. And I won't attempt to read her German there. But her question just asks, how do you flourish along as you grow, modeling your own talents, your leadership, and how would you define talent?
Vielen Dank, Beata. Beata was my German professor. It's such a great question, such a great set of questions there.
I have to say, ausgezeichnete Präsentation, excellent presentation. Okay, and I remember you sitting in the front row. It just brings me joy thinking about owls and the dialogues that I wrote up for the class, and so that's just wunderbar. Vielen Dank.
Vielen Dank. I would say, so the question here is, how do you flourish as you grow, modeling your own talents and leadership? I think for me, a big piece is just watching others and learning from others. And so, for example, in graduate school, I had a lot of great mentors. At Manchester, I had a lot of great mentors, and whether that was students that were senior to me in the psychology department or other classes, and kind of learning from them, learning in graduate school from more senior colleagues in the program, and really even now in my workplace. So I'm by far the most junior person on my team. And so being able to watch how others carry themselves and interact with others across the organization, I think is a big piece, but also just really practicing what we preach in terms of owning your own development and being always development oriented. So a lot of things we work on with engineers at GE Aerospace is carving out time for your own development. So thinking about what are some new experiences you could gain, new exposure to different things, or different education, maybe formal education or a course or something like that. And so really just making sure I carve out time for that is something that I focus on personally. And how would I define talent? What a great question. I think broadly we just define talent as kind of like people resources. And so these are the people that work for an organization, and that's our talent. And you could maybe define the effectiveness of that talent in different ways, but I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks for that question, Beata. Looks like we have another one in the chat here. How do you measure whether your current hiring process is successful or needs changed? There's several different things we could do, but one of them is we look at statistical relationships between how well one performs on one of our tools, so maybe an assessment of some sort, and then their eventual performance on the job. So maybe it's how long they stay on the job, how well they're performing 1 or 2 or 3 years later, and looking at statistical relationships between those two things. and that hopefully it's a positive relationship, showing that people who do better on our tests also do better in the job. And if that relationship gets too low, then that shows us that we need to, maybe make a few changes or dial things in different directions a little bit. But that's kind of a good indicator typically if it's working effectively, but also some other important outcomes are really, I'd say a really important one is thinking about the participant experience going through it. So we want to make sure that they're having a good experience. They are thinking about the organization in a positive way, that they understand why they're doing this. So in a lot of ways, maybe they feel good about going through this because they say, I'm working for an organization that cares that they get the right people and that they're doing this in a fair way that's not, subject to bias or just kind of the whims of individuals that don't put much thought into it, but actually going through a really rigorous process. That's kind of the goal of this, is that people feel good about that. Looks like we have a hand up. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, Connor, Mark Rosenberry, 1969 graduate. And I was in business in the 80s and 90s when GE was the model company. Everything they did was deemed right. Wall Street gave them a big valuation. They were diversified. And their CEO, Jack Welch, had very tough management style, rank and yank employees, aspiring managers. You would move them across the country every 3 to 5 years. Some say that's because their allegiance would be to the company and not to the community. And so I just Googled it. Jack Welch retired in 2001. So how often do you encounter his legacy? And people say that's not the way Jack did it, or we got to do it better like Jack did, etc.
What a great question, Mark. You know your GE history very well, it seems like. I would say that it's not often that we hear that explicitly stated, but we feel it very often. So a lot of folks on my team have not been at GE Aerospace for a long time. A lot of folks are very tenured generally at GE Aerospace, having been there decades or longer. And so just as an example for everyone, that rank and yank method that Mark just mentioned was a performance management tool that GE as a conglomerate used, where basically at the end of every year, instead of just giving a performance review, which we do now, which is kind of like, are you meeting expectations? Are you exceeding expectations? Or are you below expectations? Instead of doing that and kind of giving people feedback on that, they would actually rank all of the employees on a team in terms of the highest performers and the lowest performers. And it was mandated that at the end of the year, you would actually cut and fire the bottom X percent, so maybe the bottom 10%. And so the theory was by removing the low performers at the end of the year, and we can hire some more folks in, that would gradually increase the overall performance of the organization by reducing the number of low performers. But really, it backfired by quite a bit, I would argue. And a lot of research in the subsequent decades has shown that it backfired, because think about what that does to the morale of employees, knowing that you're always potentially subject to being yanked at the end of the year. And it created a really cutthroat culture where instead of people collaborating with each other, they were always competing with each other because you didn't want to be at the bottom of that pile. So maybe I'm not going to help you with this project because it makes you look better than me. I'm going to just stick to my own projects and what I want to do. And so really, it did a lot of bad things culturally for the organization. And I think there's a lot of argument to be made that that's one thing that led to the poor financial performance of GE in kind of the 2005 to 2015 era. There were a lot of financial struggles. And it's just kind of in the last decade that has turned around quite a bit. So maybe that's a long-winded answer to your question, that we don't hear it explicitly, but I think we still feel remnants of that and are kind of still actively working against some of those forces that have been long ingrained in the culture. But that's a great question.
Hello, Connor. This is Wendy.
Hey, Wendy.
Sorry about my black box presentation here, but apparently my camera is malfunctioning, so I sound like a student. Really sorry about that. But I had two questions for you. First of all, I am a GE Aerospace stockholder. So now that you're there, I assume I should continue to hold on to this stock?
I think I should have some sort of sentence prepared here saying that I'm not a financial analyst. Please don't take financial advice from me. First quarter earnings are reported on Thursday morning, so tune in at 7:30, Wendy. But yeah, the organization's doing really well financially.
Yeah, I track it. I've seen that, and I'm sure you contribute to that. Second question, actually, Beate was asking the same question in chat, and that is, how much have you incorporated AI into your methodology for can do, will do, and other types of decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question. So generally, we're looking to bring AI into work lives quite a bit to help with lots of different problems. We do have to be very careful when it comes to making talent decisions using AI because there's actually some strict regulation thinking about federal guidelines and also in many states. Now, there's state and other local guidelines regulating the use of AI to make talent decisions in an automated way. So for example, there's now technology that could screen resumes using AI automatically and just screen out the bottom X number of resumes. But there's a lot of laws regulating the use of that, arguing that AI might be biased in how they evaluate those resumes. And so a lot of it we have to be careful, but I think there are some other great opportunities thinking about, for example, employee engagement surveys or other employee surveys with 50 some thousand employees that perhaps take an employee survey and each of them leave several comments. That's thousands of comments that are left in an employee survey. How do you wade your way through those comments to derive some insights that you can act on? AI provides a really great way to summarize different comments and generate themes in a very quick way. So that's, I would say, one big one that we've been doing right now is thinking about kind of content, analyzing and summarizing qualitative data. Another one too is just helping people get to different resources they need in the organization. Organizations like GE Aerospace are incredibly complex, and a lot of people are not thinking about HR things that they need to do. So when do I need to submit my evaluation of my employees, or where do I go to find this learning course, or what we have you. So we've been creating some different chatbots that can help kind of direct employees to different learning resources or different HR tools that they have at their disposal. But there's lots of other applications too, and maybe we could talk offline some, Wendy. Would love to chat more about that, but that's a great question from you and Beata.
Thank you. And I'd be happy to chat about it.
Sounds great.
Hey, Connor, welcome to the Alumni Board. Glad to have you joining.
Awesome, thanks so much.
I think I've got like 2 meetings left or 1 year to go here on my term, but I've had a good time on the board, and I think you'll be a great addition to the board. I'm also a tennis alumni of Manchester, and I don't know if I caught this or not. Are you still playing tennis?
I no longer play competitively, but Isaac and I will go out. Isaac lives in Fort Wayne too, so we'll go out and hit around sometimes, but not competitively anymore per se.
I recently revived my career, and I highly recommend it. So
okay.
Don't give it up for too long. I took about 20
years. Fair enough.
I took about 20 years off. So go ahead and keep playing. I was going to ask about AI as well, but they beat me to that. I'll throw one out. I'm going to ask for advice from you. I've got to interview a candidate on Thursday. What's a good question or two I should throw in the repertoire when I'm interviewing a candidate for a position?
It's a great question. I would say, typically we don't have any, rules of thumb or go-to questions in the bag to ask people. I would say a lot of it depends on the role, but a couple of my favorites are asking, tell me about a time you made a mistake and what you learned from that mistake. I think learning from mistakes is really important. And also just maybe ask them, one time what they've learned recently about maybe something they needed to learn for something for work, but weren't mandated to learn it, but just had to learn something. They took the initiative to learn something, I guess I would say. I'd say that's another good one, just really getting into to what extent people are developing themselves and learning, I think is a really key attribute.
Great, thanks.
Thanks for that question.
Here, I am also a psychology graduate from 1969.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
I'm so impressed with how large the psychology program has turned out to be, because back in my day, the psychology department was one person, Don Colburn. Fortunately, he was a wonderful person, and I did receive great mentoring, and I attribute getting a full ride to Boston University for my doctorate to the wonderful letter that Don wrote for me. So psychology at Manchester is long and strong. My question for
Absolutely.
you is, what do you try to work on with your leadership in terms of growth? You mentioned that as one of the things in your bailiwick, and I'm just curious, what is it that you have for programming for your leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're still kind of fleshing out some of that programming to direct people to, actually, but I would say there's kind of two buckets of general learning experiences we have. One of them is focused on some of those more technical, functional skills or capabilities. So, really helping people, especially if they've come from not a financial background, how can they develop their financial acumen and financial skills as they get into higher level leadership roles where they need to have that financial understanding. That's an example of one course we do. The other one that I think is more interesting and is probably more needed by more people is learning about how to be a good leader and how to be a good coach. So thinking about coaching as an everyday skill, and not necessarily always downward coaching just to your direct reports, but how can we coach our peers, or how can we even coach leaders that we have? And just everyday coaching as like an everyday habit that we do, to really help build capability within our teams and not just tell our teams what to do, but how to empower people to solve problems themselves and develop their own capabilities. So I would say we have a great program that we've started on developing coaching skills within leaders that I think is really effective, and I'm really excited about that. Thanks for that question.
Connor, there's some questions in the chat. And so, well, President Stacy just complimented your presentation, and she's just hoping to reach out to you sometime. She has several questions.
Awesome.
So
yeah, thanks so much. Please do.
and
Thanks so
then
much
it
for
looks
joining,
like,
Beata and Ava. Thanks so much.
yeah.
Awesome. Any other
Anyone?
final questions or comments from anyone? Thanks so much for joining tonight, everyone.
Connor, this is Jerry Wurzler. As a brother-in-law to your grandpa, Gary, he would say, well done.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, just on behalf of the Alumni Office, Connor, thank you so much for sharing tonight. We are just so incredibly proud to call you a Manchester alum and the great work that you are doing. I hope that you realize that you are carrying out the Manchester mission of improving the human condition through your work at GE Aerospace. So we are just really proud of the work that you are doing, and proud to call you a Manchester alum. So thank you to everyone else that joined the call this evening. I do want to invite you to our next event in this speaker series. It's next Tuesday, the 27th, at 7 p.m. And we will be hearing from a current student, Megan Pierce. She's a senior at Manchester this year, and she has a unique hobby of collecting memorabilia of the Joker, and she has a Guinness World Record for that. And so she will be sharing about her collection and showing us some of her most prized possessions. So I hope you all register for that event and join us for that. But just again, thank you, Connor, and thank you everybody for joining this evening.
Thanks so much
Have
for the
a
opportunity. Great seeing everyone.
Thanks, Connor.
Bye, everyone.